Hello, and welcome to Day by Day True Crime Stories, the podcast where we explore a different crime or justice milestone from this day in history. I'm your host, Kona Gallagher, and today is September 16th. On this day in 1920, at 12:01 p.m., a horse-drawn wagon packed with dynamite and iron sash weights exploded on Wall Street, right outside the headquarters of J.P. Morgan & Company. In a moment, dozens were killed, hundreds were wounded, and trust in public safety shattered. It was a terrorist act with no one ever held accountable, but many who were forever changed. Today, we're discussing the Wall Street bombing. Let's get started. Noon on Wall Street was supposed to be predictable. Clerks and messengers darting out for sandwiches, brokers stepping into the sun, and secretaries getting some fresh air on the corner. But at 12:01 p.m., the routine broke. A horse-drawn wagon rolled to a stop in front of the U.S. Assay Office across from J.P. Morgan & Company at Wall and Broad Streets. Witnesses said that the driver dropped the reins, stepped away, and melted into the crowd. Under a tarp sat roughly 100 pounds of dynamite and heavy cast iron sash weights. They were window counterweights intended to become brutal shrapnel. The device detonated with a concussive blast that ripped windows for blocks, hurled glass and splinters through offices, and left the air thick with smoke and the smell of burnt horsehide and flesh. Some victims died where they stood. Others were cut down mid-step by flying iron. A young messenger had his throat slashed by a fragment. Inside the New York Stock Exchange, President William H. Remick felt the building shudder as crowds outside panicked and ran for cover. Doctors, clerks, and even teenagers raced toward the smoke, hauling the wounded into taxis and commandeered cars as red-tinged dust clouded the intersection. The facade of the Morgan building was pitted and scarred, and interior rooms were ripped apart. Across the neighborhood, plate glass crashed like rain. Desks splintered, floors buckled, and spiderweb cracks crawled across surviving window panes. About 30 people were killed instantly. Others would die later from their wounds. Well over 100 were seriously injured. The city's most confident intersection had become a nightmare. The NYPD and fire crews pushed through chaos as bystanders ripped fabric into bandages and turned cars into ambulances. A 17-year-old messenger, James Saul, commandeered a parked automobile and made trips, driving 30 or so injured people to hospitals. And those hospitals were overflowing. Surgeons lifted shards of iron from torsos and limbs, sutured deep lacerations, reset broken bones, and rinsed glass from eyes. The physical damage ran into the millions in 1920s dollars. The Morgan Building stone remained permanently pockmarked. Trading at the exchange was halted on the spot to prevent panic. Boards went up, and a small army of workers labored through the night to get Wall Street open again the next morning. The reopening could not erase what people had seen. Newspapers called it a crash out of a blue sky, and, quote, an unexpected death-dealing bolt which in a twinkling turned into a shamble the busiest corner of America's financial center, end quote. Funerals followed, some public, some quiet, and grief rippled through immigrant neighborhoods that had been especially hard hit. In the blast's aftermath, investigators chased both evidence and motive. The strongest suspicion fell on the Galleanists, followers of the Italian anarchist Luigi Galleani, already linked to a wave of 1919 letter bombs and attacks. Their doctrine of propaganda of the deed targeted institutions of the state and capital, and the method, dynamite and shrapnel, fit their history. Historians have long focused on Mario Buda, a skilled bomb maker and associate of Sacco and Vanzetti. He reportedly favored sash-weight shrapnel and left the U.S. soon after the bombing, living out his life back in Italy. This theory is that the Wall Street attack was a retaliatory strike for government crackdowns and prosecutions of radicals. Now, as compelling as that may sound, there was never enough proof for an indictment. Then there were the flyers, found shortly before or after the blast, that bore a stark ultimatum. Quote, "Remember, we will not tolerate any longer. Free the political prisoners, or it will be sure death for all of you." End quote. Signed, American Anarchist Fighters. Now, it looked like a claim of responsibility, or maybe a taunt. Either way, they indicated a political motive. Investigators also questioned Edwin Fisher, a New York lawyer and former tennis player who had mailed postcards warning friends to avoid Wall Street days before the explosion. He said his knowledge came, quote, "through the air." Authorities deemed him to be mentally unstable and committed him to an asylum, but his warnings couldn't be tied to any conspiracy. Other theories swirled. Was the sub-treasury the real target? Were gold shipments in play? But none could be proven. Detectives traced the flyers' paper and ink to common stock used by many printers. They canvassed blacksmiths and stables, looking for anyone who had shod a horse or serviced the wagon. One blacksmith's memory of a customer's accent seemed promising until it didn't. Witness descriptions of the driver conflicted, and as commerce demanded a swift cleanup, potential evidence was swept up with the rubble. The Bureau of Investigation, the NYPD, and local prosecutors questioned hundreds of suspected anarchists and collected fragments of sash weights, wood, and metal. But forensic technology in 1920 couldn't bridge the gap from strong suspicion to courtroom proof. Files were closed and reopened, and by 1944, a final federal review could say little more than what many already believed. Italian anarchists were likely responsible. No one was ever charged. In the century since the blast, scholars and centennial retrospectives have kept the case alive, from Beverly Gage's The Day Wall Street Exploded to more recent archival reexaminations that strengthen the Galleonist hypothesis and highlight how Red Scare politics shaped the investigation. The bombing nudged the nation toward broader domestic security powers and deeper surveillance of radicals, changes that came with a real cost to civil liberties. But the most enduring mystery is the silence. Beyond those flyers, "Remember, we will not tolerate any longer. Free the political prisoners, or it will be sure death for all of you," there was no claim, there was no confession. But maybe that was the point, to leave fear behind, not answers. Thank you for joining me on today's episode of Day by Day True Crime Stories. If you found today's episode compelling, please subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. It'll help us grow. And be sure to join me again tomorrow as we explore another significant event in true crime history. Until then, stay safe, and remember that behind every headline is a life worth remembering. Day by Day True Crime Stories is a Little Monster production.
Hey, you can do it!